Hello everyone. Tonight's video is on the effect of domestic violence and abuse. So I'll start with the physical effects. In the short term, you're going to be looking at cuts and bruises and broken bones. You might also see red or purple marks from gripping or as evidence of attempted strangulation. Then there are the long-term effects such as chronic pain, sexually transmitted diseases, paralysis due to injury, mutilation, and disfiguration. Some develop severe health problems due to a lack of medical attention while within the relationship. I once heard of a man who threw acid in his ex-wife's face to attempt to ruin her chances of finding love with someone else. Obviously, these effects are something that the victim has to cope with for a lifetime. There's no cure for them. Then there's sexual dysfunction, such as hyperactive sexual desire disorder or sexual aversion disorder. You might see menstrual cycle issues or fertility problems in women. Women may also experience unplanned or early pregnancies due to trauma. Pregnancy complications are more common among victims of domestic violence, partly because they're less likely to receive prenatal care. Abuse doesn't stop when the victim gets pregnant, it usually intensifies. Eating disorders such as bulimia and anorexia nervosa, and sleeping disorders such as insomnia are common among victims. Other side effects include muscle tension, uncontrollable shaking of limbs, and chronic fatigue. As for the psychological effects, you typically see low self-esteem, low self-confidence, and low self-respect, emotional withdrawal, anger, depression, thoughts of suicide, confusion about what a normal relationship should look like, confusion about how the abuse happened in the first place, confusion due to gaslighting, where the victim may have an altered sense of reality. In this case, we would actually use the term dissociation. They've been living in their partner's world for so long that they no longer know how to cope in the real world. This particular effect can take months to wear off, and it can really hinder a person's ability to function until it does, if it ever does, depending on the situation. Heightened sensitivity to danger is another side effect. Hypervigilance due to constant threat at home is unfortunately common. This is why victims become so attuned to their partner's behavior and language, because they're trying to gauge and predict the threat of danger. Anxiety disorders and substance abuse are common symptoms. Bitterness toward the partner or the opposite sex in general. PTSD, which in a nutshell includes flashbacks, nightmares, traumatic trigger avoidance, emotional numbing, and hyperarousal. Staying in abusive relationships sets a bad example for children because it sends the message that abusive behavior is tolerated. This means that the children are more likely to put up with abusive behavior in their own relationships or to even exhibit it themselves. Victims of abuse develop a tendency to become people pleasers. We come to believe that we are inherently unlovable, that we have to earn that love by changing ourselves. We try to be the person that our family and friends and partners want us to be. You eventually lose your sense of self. As for economic effects, the victim may have missed a lot of work days due to injuries caused by domestic violence. They may find themselves unable to pay rent or even without a job. Financial debt can be an effect of abuse. Most abusers control the finances in the relationship. Some open credit cards in the victim's name and rack up thousands of dollars in debt. This can be, if this is the case, the victim is going to have a really hard time salvaging their credit, which could be a major setback if they're looking for a new place to stay. Other times, the victim leaves the relationship with nothing but the clothes on their back, which means they have to borrow money in order to start their life over again. Unfortunately, the economic effects of abuse extend beyond the family and actually include the whole community at large. Victims of abuse typically require medical, psychological, legal, economic, and social services in order to recover. Batterers also require extensive therapy and perhaps even rehabilitation. This puts a huge strain on the welfare services in place, and it can make it less effective overall. Domestic abuse also impacts the participation and productivity within the labor force itself through absenteeism and reduced mental capacity to focus. I myself can attest to this. Towards the end of my relationship with my ex, I really noticed how I was starting to feel less and less competent at work. I'm required to memorize about 25 floors worth of names, faces, and phone numbers. And I'd actually been doing pretty well, but over a certain period of months, I noticed that I would start to constantly second guess myself and my memory and every work decision I made. I had to start looking up names and numbers that I'd known for years. I'd go home with anxiety over whether or not I'd made the right decision when faced with an emergency. My self-confidence was gone, and it was translating big time into my capability as a worker. Thankfully, the effects of abuse can be combated with therapy. It takes a while to change your thought processes and to have a different reaction to certain stimuli. Victims of abuse need support on all sides, and the longer you wait to talk to someone, the more habitual your behaviors become, and the longer it's going to take to recover. Generally, some of the effects of abuse are wrongfully attributed to the victim as personal character defects that lead them to choose the abusive situation. What people need to realize is that submission or toleration of abuse is not equal to consent. There are a million valid reasons why someone would choose to stay in an abusive relationship. And the fact that they want to be abused is never, that's not a fact. It's never a reason. If you have more questions about that, you can refer to my previous videos. But as for tonight, that's it. I'm leaving my sources in the section below, and everyone have a good night.